Dia de perna, uns squat, 4 e 20, 4 e 20. Mesma coisa que antes. Mas eu vou fazer o Progressive Overload do squat. Já tem coisa demais. Vou ter que pesquisar, mas pesquisar é coisa de outro dia. Mas, então vamos lá. Enquanto eu ouço aqui a piada, que é o sistema legal dos Estados Unidos, e os trumpistas tentando processar todo mundo que é oponente.
To the contrary, Richmond was often quoted by name in media stories about the FBI and Comey. And look at the words in the declassified Arctic Haze documents. Those documents contain such sentences as, Richmond claimed Comey never asked him to talk to the media. The investigation has not yielded sufficient evidence to criminally charge any person, including Comey or Richmond, with making false statements or with the substantive offenses under investigation. And investigative efforts have failed to identify the sources or sources of the unauthorized public disclosure. Doesn't really sound like there's a there there. And there's another reason to think that person 3 is Richmond. Richmond actually had a recent interview with prosecutors prior to the Comey indictment. Here's the thing though. That interview reportedly didn't go very well for the prosecution. Reporting on the interview, the New York Times writes, Mr. Richmond's statements to prosecutors were not helpful in their efforts to build a case against Mr. Comey, according to two people familiar with the matter. So it seems like Richmond is person 3, but if so, the legal theory, like the case itself, is a total loser. But Comey got the message Trump was sending. And now, it was time to fight like hell. Indictment broke. Comey responded with a short video uploaded to social media.
My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial.
Now that Comey himself has responded to the public, it raises a critical question. How is his legal team going to respond in court? One obvious option would be to file a motion to dismiss based on vindictive prosecution. And look, such motions are really difficult to win. It essentially requires a showing that the prosecution retaliated against the defendant for exercising a legal right. Trump, in his federal election interference case in Washington, D.C., filed one of these vindictive prosecution motions before Judge Tanya Chutkan. He alleged that special counsel Jack Smith and President Joe Biden were prosecuting him in retaliation for his criticism of the 2020 election. Chutkan rightly denied that motion, much of which was based on a New York Times report in which President Biden privately expressed to his inner circle that he believed Trump was a threat to democracy and should be prosecuted. Trump also cited Biden's private remarks in which he wished that Attorney General Merrick Garland would act less like a ponderous judge and more like a prosecutor who is willing to take decisive action. Todd Blanche, who is Trump's criminal defense attorney and who is now the #2 official at the Justice Department, is the guy who filed that vindictive prosecution motion on behalf of Trump. By contrast, Comey's vindictive prosecution motion would almost certainly be among the most compelling ever filed in an American courtroom. Even the public record alone makes a strong case. There's the years of taunts Trump hurled at Comey, the president's open calls for his indictment, his firing of the prosecutor who declined to pursue charges, his installation of Halligan as a replacement, the leaks outlining her intent and knowledge of the declination memo, the president's jubilant social media posts celebrating the indictment. You get the point.
Uns lanches, velho. Eu não sei como é que faz os lanches mesmo. É assim. Desce aqui assim. Tem que aprender mais variedade, né? Ia ficar só com esses, mas só esses não. Tem que fazer uma variação.
There's dozens and dozens and dozens of public statements that show Trump's animus against Comey. The discovery process tied to a vindictive prosecution motion would further expose the deeply corrupt and abusive path that led to the Comey indictment at the Justice Department. And given that juries can be unpredictable, Comey's lawyers may well view the filing of a motion to dismiss to be the less risky path. But Comey hinted at another option in his video on Thursday. As he stated, I'm innocent, so let's have a trial. Comey, clearly confident in his innocence, isn't inclined to delay. And a motion to dismiss for vindictive prosecution doesn't address the fundamental weakness of the evidence itself. It doesn't, in other words, allow Comey the opportunity to prove his innocence before a jury of his peers. So yeah, Comey might push for a speedy trial, aiming to lay bare in court or just how hollow the charges against him truly are. As Comey himself said,
Fear is the tool of a tyrant.
James Comey is the headline today, and people on both sides of the aisle have grudges against him. But this isn't really about Comey. It's about the collapse of the basic principle that the law should apply the same way to everyone, no matter how powerful. When prosecutors resign rather than participate, and the president fills their chairs with loyalists who see criminal law as just another political weapon, it's not just Comey who's in danger. It's all of us. Trump has already said that there will be more enemies to investigate, more indictments to manufacture, more careers to ruin. If he can do this to the former FBI director, he can do it to anyone who crosses him. And once that line is crossed, it doesn't snap back easily. So, yeah, this isn't about whether you like James Comey or hate him. It's about whether we still believe in the preciousness of the rule of law, not by law. Because the Trump administration clearly has a recipe to mutate the justice system into rule by law that serves his whims. And it's working. Step 1, purge the ranks of the Justice Department of all who abide by the Code of Legal Ethics. Step 2, install unqualified hacks, zealots, and loyalists who religiously obey your orders. Step 3, use prosecution as persecution against all your political enemies. Trump doesn't need to win a trial against James Comey to achieve the rule by law system that serves him. His DOJ will most likely fail in court against James Comey, but it honestly doesn't matter because the message here is clear. Defend Trump for any reason, and you will face the wrath of a fully weaponized perversion of the justice system.
Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how...
Estados Unidos tá na merda, viu? Carai. Tá no primeiro ano ainda, né? A merda vai ser grande, viu?
On Monday, US President Donald Trump, alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, presented yet another peace plan for Gaza. Despite the fact that the previous proposed ceasefires had all fallen short, Trump seemed remarkably optimistic about this one, claiming that it could even bring, quote, eternal peace to the Middle East. However, in the press conference afterwards, both Trump and Netanyahu made it clear that if Hamas didn't accept the deal, Israel would escalate its war in Gaza, with Netanyahu promising to, quote, finish the job, and Trump promising American support to that end. So in this video, we're going to take a look at this new peace plan, why there's reason to suspect that Hamas won't accept it, and what might actually happen next. If you're interested in the political alliances and groupings that shape our world, then you might enjoy our poster, Every Alliance Explained. It shows, in slightly confusing detail, all of the world's major alliances and how different countries live
Esse de
together.
terra é muito mais intenso que o outro. Para um e vou pro outro, para um e vou pro outro. É um
So let's get
movimento.
straight into it. We've actually got the full text of Trump's new peace plan for Gaza. And it's
Por isso que eu chego a ficar nessa live pra eu terminar.
We'll run through quickly now.
Para de
Just
vez.
quickly. Point 1 states that Gaza will become a de-radicalized, terror-free zone. Point 2 states that Gaza will be redeveloped, quote, for the benefit of the people. Point 3 states that if both sides agree, the war will end immediately. Importantly, however, this doesn't mean that IDF troops will withdraw from Gaza. Rather, they'll just withdraw to a, quote, agreed-upon line, only a kilometre or so back from their current line of control. Points 4 and 5 deal with hostages, obliging Hamas to return all hostages in return for thousands of Gazans detained since October 7. Point 6 offers an amnesty to Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and decommission their weapons, while points 7 and 8 essentially guarantee a resumption of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Point 9 says that Gaza will temporarily be governed by a technocratic committee of Palestinians and international development experts, overseen by a so-called Board of Peace, to be chaired by Trump and include former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. This committee will govern Gaza until the Palestinian Authority, which is nominally
cara fala
responsible
cada
for
merda, viu?
has, quote, completed its reform program. It's worth noting that this is, at first glance, quite a significant concession from Netanyahu, who's previously refused to countenance the idea of a Palestinian Authority playing any role in Gaza. Although, of course, a lot depends here on what exactly is meant by completed its reform program. And the deal also makes reference to Trump's 2020 plan, which required the Palestinian Authority to swallow some pretty bitter pills, including refraining from any attempt to join any international organization without Israel's consent, and taking no action against Israel or the US via the ICC, ICJ, and all other tribunals. Next up is point 10, which includes some waffle about Trump's economic development plan. Point 11 then says that Gaza will become a special economic zone with preferential tariff rates. Point 12 addresses the question of Palestinians being forcibly expelled from Gaza, which is something that Israel has been accused of considering, insisting that, quote, no one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. Point 13 then basically says that Hamas must agree not to have any role in Gaza's post-war governance structure, and its total demilitarization. Points 14 and 15 then basically say that Gaza's Arab neighbours will lead a new international coalition called the International Stabilization Force, or ISF, that will essentially become responsible for security.
Cansados da última.
Point 16 says that
Esfria pouco.
take over from the IDF, who will eventually only be responsible
cai a
for
pressão de
security
vez.
along Gaza's borders with Israel and Egypt. Interestingly, point 17 says that this will happen even if Hamas rejects the deal. In other words, this Arab-led coalition would apparently replace the IDF, whatever happens. Points 18, 19 and 20 then basically say that Palestinians, Israel and the US will work together towards peaceful coexistence and, quote, a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognise as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. At first glance, this looks like a meaningful concession from Netanyahu, who has previously ruled out the idea of a Palestinian state. But it's worth noting that this includes no concrete commitments, merely a recognition from Israel and the US that it's the aspiration of the Palestinian people. So, could this deal actually bring eternal peace to the Middle East? Well, at first glance, there seems to be a cause for optimism.
Não tem
Israel
uma
has made
sétima
at least
proteína.
some superficial concessions, and the deal has been well received
Para
internationally.
crescimento, fala para tomar depois, só que tem pesquisa que fala que antes dá bom
And the
também.
foreign ministers of Saudi
EMEA.
Arabia, Jordan, the UAE, Indonesia, Pakistan, Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt released a joint statement, quote, welcoming Trump's plan. The fact that the Arab countries that we expected to lead the ISF, like Egypt and Jordan, and relatively Hamas-friendly countries like Turkey and Qatar, have all reacted so positively does seem like a good sign. Nonetheless, familiar stumbling blocks do remain. Most obviously, this requires Hamas to accept their demilitarization for the good of ordinary Palestinians, which feels unlikely. Furthermore, the plan is remarkably vague. It isn't clear, for instance, what the precise relationship between the Palestinian government and the Trump-led Board of Peace will be. The deal text only tells us the board will, quote, set the framework, nor are there any concrete commitments vis-à-vis the Palestinian state, or any clarity on who could serve on the technocratic Palestinian committee. Would civil servants who served under Hamas, for instance, be excluded? Perhaps most problematic is the lack of clear timetable for the IDF's promised withdrawal. This isn't in and of itself a bad thing. Lots of peace deals use vague language as a stepping stone to a better defined agreement. But it is a problem in this context, because there's zero trust between Israel and Hamas will expect Israel to exploit this vagueness in the future. Netanyahu's
Movimento de
comments since
perna.
the deal's presentation
aqui.
won't have helped things either. On Monday evening, Netanyahu put out a video in Hebrew framing the deal as a diplomatic ploy, claiming that instead of Hamas isolating us, we isolated Hamas, and that, quote, the IDF will remain in most of the Strip. Netanyahu's comments were presumably an attempt to placate the far-right ministers whom he relies on for his parliamentary majority. But this didn't work. Now, on Tuesday,
caindo na pressão, tô
Prime
morrendo
Minister
agora.
Smotrich
Porra de
announced
perna,
a
de perna é a
proposal as,
bosta.
quote, resounding diplomatic failure. Furthermore, contrary to what recent headlines have implied, Israel's Arab neighbors have not actually said that they support the plan. Rather, they, quote, welcome Trump's efforts towards peace, but insist upon a comprehensive deal that includes, quote, full Israeli withdrawal and a two-state solution under which Gaza is fully integrated with the West Bank. This isn't explicitly guaranteed by the deal, and again, Netanyahu's comments won't have helped. Not only has Netanyahu claimed that the IDF will remain in most of the Strip, but he also reiterated his opposition to a Palestinian state, insisting, quote, it is not written in the agreement, and expressing skepticism that, quote, the leopard can change its spots. In other words, casting doubt on the idea of the Palestinian Authority ever taking control of Gaza, and thus the prospect of a unified Palestinian state covering both Gaza and the West Bank. Now, this isn't to say that the deal will necessarily fail, and Trump does deserve credit for squeezing out at least some concessions from Netanyahu. Nonetheless, history doesn't bode well here, and familiar obstacles are already rearing their heads. Ultimately, we live in a world where growing geopolitical and economic issues like this are hitting headlines every day. And while it's easy to sometimes feel overwhelmed,
About 1 billion years ago, North America was facing imminent destruction. Vast tectonic forces were threatening to tear the continent apart right through the middle. That didn't end up happening, so we still have a continent, which is cool. But that time of looming apocalypse did leave a lasting legacy, which would not only shape the geography of North America, but also the lives of its human inhabitants. So much so that for a time, around 9,000 years ago, one indigenous American culture used the remnants of this geologic upheaval to become the most technologically advanced in the world. To tell this incredible story, we're going to hand this episode over to our good friend, science communicator Alexis Dahl, who's reporting from Michigan, the one-time copper crucible of civilization. Take it away, Alexis.
Across the world and among different cultures, human technology has followed a pretty linear trajectory. We started out in the Stone Age, shaping axes, spear, and arrowheads out of stones like flint. Then, once we learned how to extract metals from the rocks that contained them, we started casting those metals into more effective tools, as well as protective armor. Civilization had entered the Bronze Age. Bronze is an alloy, which is a metal mixed with another substance. It's usually made from copper and tin, although you could swap the tin for arsenic. You shouldn't, but you technically could.
Só afeta a perna e agora tá fazendo mais adutores. Não sei se é porque eu mudei o formato do meu pé. Mas é isso aí, esse dia de perna é a maior desgraça, esse lixo. Tem que ver alguma coisa diferente pra fazer. Só dá um ardor e parece totalmente inefetivo. E ainda fico passando mal leve da cabeça com esses movimentos de pra lá e pra cá.